So the final demographic racial transition is what I'd like to talk to you about. And I think you will agree with me that we are entering a moment, once I explain to you what it is, I think you're going to agree with me that we are in a moment where this process is either going to be a catastrophe or we are going to fight for a solution to change the way we look at our world, and especially the way we treat the people that we think are different from us. Okay, so here's what I see as the problem. So racial disparities in health, in all forms and measures of well-being are still here. They have not gone anywhere. In some ways, they've become more aggravated. There is a white fear that the racial transitions caused by immigration are going to basically change the world. Now, this is where I'm getting this from. We already knew this when we asked people who they wanted to live next door to them and who they wanted to live on their block and who they wanted to live on their community or in their neighborhood. We had some inclination of this. But more recently, social psychologists have been going around asking people what they thought about the impending demographic transformation of their societies. They didn't ask it like that. They asked them, what did they think about these changes? And what they found is that if they didn't tell people about the demographic facts, that ultimately in a few years the United States is going to be a society in which the minority populations will make up the majority of the population. That if they didn't tell them that, people were okay. Let them come in, they can move on my block, that's all right. But if they added that simple information to before the people answered the question, the people changed their whole attitude. And their attitude became, why are they coming here taking our stuff? Or how are they going to interfere with the life chances that I have and that my children have? So this is a kind of fear, of what I'm calling a kind of fear of this racial transition, which is inevitable at this point. Just the whole demography of it has already started. If you got children up to age 5, they already exist in this reality. The majority of the children under 5 are already minority children combined together. So the world has changed. Okay. This is my most complicated figure I thought a lot about before I put it up in here, but I thought I should so that you'll get my point about what a demographic transition is, and then you will understand how I put the demographic with the racial to come out with this whole demographic racial transition, which you're going to agree with me is a very important thing we need to consider today. Basically, the demographic transition is a big idea among demographers, and it's an idea about the relationship of the number of births to the number of deaths. The basic notion is this. In the beginning, death was high and birth were high. So in order to get a few children, you had to have a lot of children. If you wanted 2 to survive, you had to have 4. If you wanted 6 to survive, you had to have 12. And that was the beginning situation. Then what you had is a decline in the mortality. When the mortality went down, now the population numbers begin to shoot up. And they shoot up because deaths are down, but people are still in the old behavior, and they're still having the old number of children. Eventually, the number of children they have begin to decline. And then you have low fertility and low mortality. And what happens after that? The population starts aging. And why does it start aging? It's because you're having less children, but people are living longer because mortality is down. These phases, these trips and turns, these shifts in mortality and birth, these are the points of the demographic transition. Okay? That's your demography 101. Now this is the race 101. Okay? First, race is not genetic. I love that press conference that Clinton had with Ventura and the other guy, the private and the public ventures in mapping the genome. Right after they mapped it, both of them came up, and first Clinton started out and said, "I'm happy to know that we're all the same people. That's one of the results of this." And then both of the scientists got up and they said, "One thing is clear is that race is not genetic." There's a lot of debate about that now, but fundamentally, the idea of race is something that is not grounded in our genes. Another thing, I know it's going to be hard for you to believe this, and you have to remind you of a joke that Richard Pryor told once. It was about something else. And so he's there, and but what he says is the woman says, "What are you doing? This is our bed," and blah, blah, blah. And he says, "Who are you going to believe? Your lion eyes or me?" Okay, y'all don't get it. Okay, it'll come. Now, race is not a system of color contrary to what you have been told. And here's a quick mental experiment you can do with me. You have white people. You heard of white people, right? You have black people. Have y'all heard of black people? Now, if a white woman and a black man get in bed, do what they're going to do, wake up in the morning, and that woman is pregnant, and she delivers a gray baby. You see? So you understand the logic. You take that out, and every which way you look at race, and you're going to find it really is not a system of color. It's a system in which you have been taught to read certain markers about what you see in people's physicality that makes you think that that's race, and it's hard to undo. So I probably didn't undo it for you right now, but on the drive home, as you're having dinner, when you're eating breakfast, looking across the table, it will sink in. And I'm telling you, it's right. And the thing, if you study race really, you'll get back to where I was, which is race is basically socially constructed to facilitate inequality. So if you really want to get rid of the problems of race, it is really a fight to get rid of inequality. It is a fight to provide equal justice and opportunities for everyone to undo the legacy of some of the barriers which have prevented full participation in the society. Now, you put these two things together, and it helps you, I think, understand better the situation that the world is in. Now, this is what I like to call the original moment of race. This is around 1500, and what it is expressing, 1500 to about 500 years later, but or 300 years later, what it is showing is the creation of the European diaspora, and this is as Europeans move outside of Europe, and they settle in other places, and some of these places become new Europes, like the United States, New Zealand, Australia. These places become these new Europes. And these Europeans transformed the spaces they entered with this idea of race and with a practice of racism. And that has been the pillar of what race is about. The white line are the white diaspora, the greenish yellow lines are the African diaspora. The size of the lines is not important, it's just the directions of the flows that I'm trying to suggest to you. Before this period, race as we know it did not exist. Colonialism existed, enslavement existed, all kinds of things that are bad existed, but the racial dimension of them did not exist. I think that was an automatic shift from one of my slides from way back when. Okay, but that's the original moment. Today, the world is in constant communication. You heard about 3% who are mobile or in some other country, but the circulation, the flows of people are extraordinary. It's not something that is going to stop tomorrow. The question is how we deal with this reality. Now, this is a chart that is just suggesting to you what is going on. What are we in the midst of? That is, this change or this shift, that is people moving from other places to other places, is happening. Of the 27 nations in the European Union, 27 of the 28 nations in the European Union are in that phase of the demographic transition where population is not reproducing itself. They are not having sufficient babies to reproduce the population. They are almost entering or have entered a phase of negative population growth. Now, one of the healthiest things that's happening to those societies is they have migrants coming in, because migrants can do stuff. They can work, and as they work, they contribute to the society. If you simply don't have the people, this replacement migration is actually a very positive thing. It's about as positive there as it is here. And you don't really even stop it by stopping migration per se, because these things have a way of kicking themselves back into motion, dependent on the social and the economic circumstances that exist. I mean, because if you take California, and I'm from California, at one point it was part of Mexico. We can't forget that part too, about the whole Mexican thing. There was a war, you know, all that stuff. But okay, that's not my point today. So this is Africa. I like to look at Africa's population as an asset to the world. What most demographers have told you was bad because Africa's population is growing, and what you see here is how Africa's percentage of the population is increasing a substantial degree. This is the overall population almost reaching 25% by 2050. Now that's 25% of the total population. Of the population that is between the ages of 15 and 65, they're making up almost twice this amount, showing that Africans, at the same time that there's a reduction of the working age population everywhere else in the world, is going to stand there to be able to help the world once again with its bodies and its people, and hopefully without a system of enslavement. Africans stand to make a tremendous contribution to the rest of the world in terms of personnel. We could talk about that more as we go along. And this is the thing. Even the UN knows this. The UN did a study in 2011, which was called Migration Replacement. And they were trying to make these suggestions to the member states that, yes, we understand the doom and gloom that is projected, but the only way to offset that is to recognize that there is this flow. What needs to happen is a new conversation about migration, a new conversation about how the world's wealth is spent and how people are compensated for the contributions they make to sustain societies. Now, the United States has a particular history, which I will try to restate this in a way, because what has happened in the United States is a reflection of the attitudes that are developing and sharpening in Europe. That is, we know that there's a great amount of renewed xenophobia, anti-immigrant attitude all over Europe. And as Michael was suggesting, this is reflected in political parties, right-wing, anti-immigrant political parties. And, you know, when somebody says they're anti-immigrant, they usually don't stop with just the people who are moving in. But they also extend that to the people who look like the people who are moving in that are already there. And so it becomes something that compounds and kind of gives a lot of nourishment for the kinds of discriminations which exist in the society. Where am I at? About 5 minutes? I count 5, 6 minutes, somewhere like that. See, the thing that happened in Europe, what in the US we know we have race, right? So the thing that happened in Europe is that they have begun to racialize things which otherwise you wouldn't have expected to become racialized, like religion. You know, now in the U.S., if you're an Arab, you classify, you check off on the census white. Now, it's probably not too many people these days thinking that Arabs and whites are the same. But that's because of the political conversation that's happening. But the political conversation that led to that particular designation was different than the one we are having now. But I'm quite sure there will be questions raised about whether the Arabs really are white, which would be an exception, because usually it goes the other way. A group arrives in the U.S., say like the Jews, and first they're not white, then they become white. The Irish, they're not white, then they become white. So there's a process in which this construction of race is fluid, and it changes because it doesn't have any basis in us genetically, and it is based on our concept about our relationships with each other. Now, the United States, if you can just get abstract with me, starts out with this group of people, and this is the Native American population. Then come the migrants. The first group of migrants are those coming from the European diaspora, and they come with devastating impact on the indigenous population: war, disease, relocation, everything that has become negative about understanding how you treat people when they come to your society was done to those who were already here. Let's remember that when we start thinking about what we do with immigrants, especially those who are suffering something and find their ways to the shores of the U.S. Now, the African diaspora, contrary to some people in the current administration, were not just immigrants. They were brought here by force. It was a violent force. It was an institution called enslavement. And that group helped transform America as well, because they brought everything they brought from Africa and put it in a space in which they were oppressed, enslaved, and all those things that go with that. And then you had who did I just add? Oh, the Latino population. Now, okay, in reality, Latinos had to be around much longer than this. But this is when we started counting them, okay? And so when we started counting them, this is how we count. Now, even when we started counting them, 90% of them said they were white. Yeah, because if you're in the U.S., it's better to be white. Come on, okay. And then we had the Asian population. This basically gives you the U.S. population. So I wanted to try to measure this. So here's an index of diversity. That's what this line is. And it just basically shows you the flows of diversity. And what happened with the restraints put on, first you get this big increase. Oh, right, I have a thing. You get this big increase as a consequence of the demise of the Native American population, the rise of the European and the African population, and then it starts going down because there's basically just a continued rise of the European population, especially once you had the end of the slave trade, blah, 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 so forth and so on, till you end up at a period around here where we're now raising this question again. That is, my colleagues have suggested to you a lot about what happened in between these two periods to get us here. But here now we are where diversity is on the rise. And I've already suggested to you that it is inevitable. You're not going to stop it, whatever you try to do. But it is going to be a very interesting conversation that we're engaged in. This line that is solid from here on is when you consider that the Latino population can be the race that they declare on the census document, or if they declare other, they can be that. That's what diversity will look like. But if you take this, or this is with the group, this is with them declaring their race. If we just say the Latinos are Latinos, we get this line right here. And so the diversity increases. And this will be something that will develop because, as I suggested to you in 1950, 1960, 90% of Latinos said they were white. By 2010, only 52% said they were white. The number is higher for non-immigrants than it is for immigrants. Okay, so my final words is that we've had demographic racial transition could result in more international and domestic equality or apartheid. We have to decide what we're going to do with people. If we're going to treat people badly, it's going to lead to less equality and more apartheid. Okay, let me go through here quickly here. Okay. We need to end the fear of demographic racial suicide, both among scholars and everyday people. The reality is that the U.S. is going to become a more diverse society. The question is what kind of courage we have about what we're going to do in this space. And finally, if you police the world, then you must open your doors to different people and accept diversity against marginalization. Remember, now you could do it with T, you can do it whatever, but if you're going to patrol and tell people what they can do, you're going to have to open your doors. In other words, hide behind your doors and be quiet. Thank you very much.